Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chats with Chels podcast. I am your host, Chelsea Miller, and today I have a very special guest. His name is Shawn Portwood, and he is currently in the Nutritional Sciences PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we have a lot to dive into today. I did send him some questions to answer, so I'm excited to have him on. And please welcome Shawn. Hi.
How's it going? And
Good. How are you?
want to add thanks for giving me homework, as if we don't have enough on our plates already. You had to give homework for this. But
Hey,
no, I'm
this
super
homework
happy.
was like very as much detail as you wanted to give me.
Yeah, but PhD students, we don't just like write one or two answers or one or two sentences. We have to deep dive. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. So before this, Shawn and I discussed what we were doing for our latte because that is one thing that him and I both have in common.
Yes.
Um, what is your latte today, Shawn?
Today, my latte is a pumpkin spice latte, homemade, which is got to get in the season for the fall, right? Like that's
Absolutely.
that's kind of the move. Yeah, I
I'm
just use
surprised you're not tired of pumpkin spice lattes from Starbucks.
it's funny that that was one of the driving forces of why I wanted to work for Starbucks, was because of the pumpkin spice latte. I love that drink so much. Yeah, it was just kind of a random thing that, like, I would make friends with all the baristas before I started working there, and I would always find out like when they were going to launch, because they always launch it a little bit earlier than, or they have it in store before they launch it. And
Right.
so I would always make friends with the barista so that I could get the samples before it actually came out. And every store that I went to, wherever I moved, that was always my goal, was to become friends with the baristas so that I could get my pumpkin spice before everybody else, because it's just so good. And then I got a job there, and then I drink more pumpkin spice lattes and pumpkin cold brews and pumpkin anything you can think of, then I can probably count or would like to count, um, without bringing shame upon my house.
Well, I guess that's a good place to start because we didn't really talk about what jobs you've held before the PhD. So, if you want to go into a brief background of your work history, I think that's one of the most interesting things about your story. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a long history of pretty much everything. I mean, I've done everything from construction, all the way up to corporate business life. Right out of high school, I didn't really have a lot of direction. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was from a medium-sized city, but never one that was like really all about like drive and go get 'em attitude and things like that. So it was just kind of like, if you don't know what you want to do, you just kind of float around. And I ended up going into the military right out of high school or shortly thereafter, and spent one tour through the Marine Corps, or one contract through the Marine Corps. Ended
how
up,
many years was that?
I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years. So, not to be too ancient or show how old I really am, but it was from 98 to 04. So, back in the day, back in my
Back in your day.
day. um, yeah, so I was in there for 6 years. Ended up rupturing my eardrum while I was in, so decided I didn't want to stay in after that. Once my contract was up, I got out, and same thing. I still really didn't have a lot of direction of what I wanted to do, so I just kind of latched onto comfortability and necessity of essentially getting a job,
Right.
and kind of weaseled my way into analytical type positions at various call centers, where I would do behind the scenes stuff, business analyst type stuff, forecasting and modeling and things like that. And then in 2009, we were kind of in the height of the big recession that we had back then. And I got laid off. And at the time, it was like impossible to find another job. Like, it was just nothing. And if you didn't have, a business background, like a degree in accounting or, whatever, you really were kind of just fighting everybody else that just had high school diplomas or basic bachelor's degrees for every job that was out there. So it was impossible. At that point, I was like, okay, I should probably figure something out and, try and get a direction in my life. And so I ended up starting school and officially starting school and diving into what I was kind of familiar with and comfortable with, which was business. I had kind of going back to high school, had a knack for accounting, which is a weird skill to be good at, but I was. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that it just clicked in my brain. And so I started pursuing a degree in accounting. And it's one of those jobs that is always going to be available. So, like, no matter what's going on in the economy, no matter what's going on in the world, everybody is going to need accountants at some level. And so there's always going to be jobs for that position. So it was just kind of a no-brainer from necessity and because I had a knack for it. So started pursuing that. Ended up taking an elective economics course. It was called the Economics of Sex and Drugs. And it was all about the black market and how that impacts and affects the true GDP. And fascinating class. And like from that moment, I was just hooked on economics and the theory of it and wanted to pursue my degree in economics. So I switched majors. I was still minoring in finance just so I had that kind of like less theoretical approach so that I could get a job.
Right.
And so kind of weaseled my way into a couple of different internships. I worked for the president of the University of Colorado's financial office. So I was an accounting intern there. And then that led to an internship with a Fortune 50 company called TIAA-CREF. I don't know if you've heard of them. They do like annuities and retirement for nonprofits and universities. So they're worth like $900 billion. Like it's a massive company. And kind of doing that, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I'm an intern. I'm still in school, and I'm making like $50,000 a year. Not a bad gig, right? Like that's not a bad way to live your life, especially as an intern. And so, in the process of kind of navigating that, there was kind of talk of potentially staying on after I graduated. I was kind of moving up through the education system, so I was a rising senior. And life happens, and we can get into that now or we can get into that later as far as like what ended up happening. But then I transitioned and ended up in my nutrition focus, and that was kind of my career in a nutshell prior to getting into nutrition.
So the point that he's getting at here is non-linear paths are common for people in higher education, which I really do have a deep appreciation for because I also have a non-linear path to where I'm at in the PhD right now. And I actually started as a dental hygiene student in college.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I wanted to help people feel more confident about their selves through their smile because like teeth are a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I just did not have focus when I started. And like you, I'm terrible at science classes. I guess I can't really say that anymore because it's not exactly true anymore.
Right. Yeah. We've
But
learned skill, but it is a skill to learn that.
right, 18-year-old me was like, I hate science. Science doesn't make sense. Math also did not make sense to me
Well,
either. So
no,
it was kind
I'd
of
argue
like
that
a,
even now still doesn't make sense.
which is hilarious to me because you were like a finance person for a
You
good
know,
portion of your life.
people say that a lot because, from a logical standpoint, you think, oh, well, math is, numbers and math is money and all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
there's definitely overlap. But at the end of the day, when you get into finances, and again, not to discount the complexity of what can go on within the scope of accounting, within the scope of finance, within the scope of economics, it can get very complicated very quickly. But at the core of it, you're adding and subtracting numbers. Like you're getting the dollars in and the dollars out, and you're adding them up and subtracting them. I mean, that's kind of what you're doing in a very, 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 very simplified. Again, I don't want to discount and have a bunch of accounting majors and finance majors knocking on my door saying, "You son of a gun." When in reality, it is very complex. But at the core of it, it's not the most complicated math, and you're not dealing with theorems and all of that stuff. So like it just made sense in my brain. But then once you get into the more complex math, you get into the calculuses and all of that, you're just like, why are there so many letters, and why are there so many shapes, and why are there so many things? Like, what in the world is happening? That it just like
Yeah.
never makes sense to me, and it still really doesn't.
I know I avoided calculus in my later undergrad. Uh, it's so funny. Like, I think I was in undergrad for 10 years,
Yeah,
just
same.
collectively.
Yeah.
because you go in right out of high school. I was terrible with like money management. I didn't really have great teachers for that, both in my house, but outside of my house too. I just was very uh, unintelligent with money management. So in my first year, I took out student loans because that was kind of the common thing, but neither of my parents could co-sign on loans for me to continue. So that loan sequence only took me through my first year, and tuition at Northern Arizona State was expensive. Like um or why did I say Northern Arizona State? It's Northern
I don't
Arizona
know.
University.
Okay. Okay. That's fair.
NAU. I'm like, it hasn't been that long, right? But tuition was pretty steep, especially when you declared dental hygiene. No one told me that it automatically increased your annual tuition by like $4,000.
Wow.
So, and I wasn't even in the dental hygiene program yet. It was just because I declared it, they said, "Oh, give us more money." So I fell out of love with school. I wasn't doing very well in any of my classes. I didn't really feel like I belonged at that school. And there were some girls who were like in that space with me that were just very mean.
Mm.
Uh,
Wow.
I don't really talk about like being bullied very often, but that was like a really hard time. So after I left NAU, I was working as a full time waitress at like I don't even know what to call it, like a Tex Mex restaurant, but it was also kind of like a sports bar. It's
Okay.
hard to explain, but I was working as a full time waitress, and I did a lot of food service industry jobs before I joined the military. But the financial part of everything, and my mom and my stepdad going through a divorce, it kind of made things complicated. And my car actually got repossessed during the 6 month time period that I had moved home from my first semester of my sophomore year of college. And that was actually a blessing in disguise now that I look back on it. Like joining the military really did get me out of the pickle that I found myself in.
Sure. Sure.
But I ended up moving away from Arizona after I joined the military because training for the Air Force was in Texas.
Mm.
And after training, they sent me to Japan. And that was a great time to be away from the United States. We can go into that a little bit later, but I really do think that this is a good time to jump into your story a little bit deeper,
Sure.
because reading it, I got teary eyed just seeing the words that you were typing. And I loved the note that you put at the bottom, like, I'm getting teary eyed writing this. It's
Yeah, it's
very,
definitely it's cathartic, to kind of relive and type it out and, remember that that is the why, like I have to remind myself that periodically when things get really challenging and make me question doing what I'm doing, especially at my age, like at this advanced age, it's not easy to be a poor college student, like
right.
my peers are literally half my age, so
Mm-hmm.
it's really isolating because I don't have direct peers. Like my peers are my professors, those are the people that I'm the same age as,
Right.
and it's hard to connect with them, even though that's what ends up always happening. Like even at UMass when I was getting my master's, my best friends from that experience and that I still talk to more than any of my fellow students are two of my professors that were just like really close. And, it's kind of taking shape, here at UW as well. Like my professors and I just kind of jive because I'm on their level from an age standpoint, a maturity standpoint, and life experience standpoint, that we relate better. And I don't have a lot to talk about with my peers because I just end up sounding like the wise old man that's giving them advice for everything, and it's
Yeah.
not really what I'm trying to do. And so, like, it's kind of hard because when things get really difficult, I don't have that venting outlet because it's kind of weird to go to your professors in that space. Like you can, and they're more than happy to like listen, but it's just a different dynamic than having that
Right.
like external peer group that I can go grab beers with, and we can kind of commiserate, shitty times in lab, or this class is really hard, or this, whatever. I don't have that outlet. And so it gets very internalized and very stressful, and really makes me question why I'm putting myself through it. And when I do get into that space, a lot of times I do spend a little bit of time reflecting. So this was kind of a good exercise, because right now I'm kind of getting into that headspace, and it, definitely gave me that opportunity, because you gave me that homework, that I was able to do that reflection that I haven't done in a while, and kind of, remind myself why I'm doing what I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah. I hate that you call it homework, because it was not my intention for you to have
I'm
homework.
just busting your
But
chops.
I know. But that was kind of the reason why I started this podcast, was so I could have an audio diary of the real, in the moment things that I'm going through. And you and I have had several conversations over Instagram message about how difficult this transition from our previous life to now has been, because of the demands of the program and just a different way of having to think about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I want to take everyone back really quick, because you have moved around a little bit. So you started off in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and you attended community college there, and they had a great credit forgiveness program.
Yeah.
And then you moved to Denver in 2005, and you went back to another community college, or was Metropolitan State like a public 4-year institution?
Yeah, it's a university.
Okay.
And yeah.
So they did not have a great credit forgiveness program, as you learned later.
Sure did not.
So for those of you who are not familiar with what we're talking about, some colleges have these credit forgiveness programs where if you just stop attending class for a certain number of classes, they just give you, is it a withdrawal? Is that what they give you? Or they just drop it?
A withdrawal. They literally just drop you, and it's as if it never happened. As long as it's before the, like there was always a cutoff date, like, just like with dropping a class in traditional classes, you have that deadline of when you can drop it before it becomes a W, or before it becomes, whatever. And at that community college that I was at, that grace period was pretty deep into the semester. But there was a deadline, but I always stopped going fairly early on, because I just had no direction. At the time I was in the military at the time, and I was working as a bouncer and also working a day job. And, again, I wasn't really that committed to the idea of getting a degree. Like I thought, hey, I'm in the military. I've got a great job. I've got, my day job. I've got, bouncing, and I'm going to be 20 forever. So who cares? And so there wasn't really like a dire need to really put a lot of effort into school. And because I was working a lot of, really long hours with the military stuff, and then like, really late hours on the weekend, I would come into class on Monday morning and just be obliterated and exhausted. And because it really didn't matter to me, it wasn't worth the sacrifice that it took to be disciplined enough to stay in that moment and stay focused on that, even though I was tired, which is really like, indicative of kind of where I was at from a maturity level, at the end of the day, I was trying to do something to better myself, but I didn't really care enough to actually stick with it. And that, that again just shows where I was at maturity wise. Like I was doing something for the future, but it wasn't important enough to really do. So,
well, and the money at that time was more helpful than, some classes that you didn't care about. But I think that's a really important distinction, because these classes that you were taking just were not your path, even though it was giving you these financial opportunities. From reading your story, it just seemed very unfulfilling. So you attended this metro college, and they ended up dropping you because you had F's at that point. But you were able to go to a community college in Denver. And I think where this starts to take a turn is when you were at the University of Colorado, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to talk a little bit about, so if you want to talk about your transition from the community college of Denver to your transfer
Mhm.
and the things that happened in your life around that point, I think that's where we should jump in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had gone to Metro State back in 2007, and because of my frame of reference of going to the community college back in Albuquerque, I just thought that the way that college worked or university worked was when you stopped going, you just got dropped.
Right.
Um, it doesn't work at Metro State, and so they ended up giving me all Fs. And so I had like 6 or 7 Fs because I tried it like 2 different semesters, and so I just had this compounding stack of Fs sitting on my transcript at Metro State. So that's kind of where that stopped. And then fast
Well,
forward to
and
when
that's a detriment to your transcripts because you have to take all of those classes with you when
Mhm.
you apply to a new college, right?
Yeah. And so that's why I ended up having to start at the community college instead of CU Denver right away because I didn't have a great track record, as they called it. And so I had to start at the community college because community college is very, very forgiving in the sense that they'll kind of just allow you to make those mistakes and still take you anyways. So I started the community college, and that was shortly after I got laid off in 2009. And so heading into 2010 was kind of when that started. And it was just kind of one of those things where I was like, I got to figure this out. I got to get going with, something so that I have something tangible to get a job. So I started at the community college, very quickly realized that the education level at the community college wasn't preparing me adequately to get into the business school at CU Denver, even though it was a direct admit program that they had in partnership with the community college. So as long as you got your associate's degree at the community college, you automatically got, and you had to meet like certain GPA requirements, things like that.
Right.
But as long as you did those check boxes, you got admitted to the business school at CU Denver. But as I was going through it and I was talking to friends that were in the CU Denver business school, I was like, I'm not getting prepared adequately at the community college to be successful in that environment. So I had the forethought to like actually look ahead a little bit and see if I was adequately getting prepared. And I realized I wasn't. And so after
Well,
a
what
year,
about that curriculum was not preparing you? Like, I'm curious to know, like, what was the red flag for you?
so in a lot of universities, they don't look at the bottom denominator. And what I mean by that is at a lot of universities, they teach the curriculum at the highest level and expect you to get up to their level, right?
Right.
They teach it and you're supposed to learn it and figure out a way to get to that top level. At this community college, which is both good and bad because community college serves an amazing purpose for a lot of underserved populations and things like that. So I'm not trying to like discount what the education was, but they do a more inclusive model that spends a lot of time catching that lower group up, which is fantastic
Okay.
because that is what gets you prepared. But I was already at the level here. I wasn't at the business school level, but I was at this level that's above where they were teaching at. And again, it's an amazing model. And I love that they do that. But I just wasn't feeling like it was going to set me up for success to get where I wanted to go. So at that point, I had amassed, I don't know, like a couple of semesters, 3 semesters worth of full credits and all A's. And so I had a good true GPA. And
Right.
because I was now at a new university, the Metro State F pile had nothing to do with it. It was no longer impacting my ability to get into CU Denver because I had amassed a better track record in the current sense. So applied, got in. I wasn't in the business school yet. I was just in the general CU Denver because I wasn't at the level of number of credits to get in there. And I still
Right.
had prereq to do and all that stuff. So I transferred into CU Denver. And at that point, it was kind of where I started navigating things and figuring out, like I love economics. So I want to major in economics. I want to minor in finance, all of this stuff. And at CU, or within the construct of the CU education system, they have a requirement, not all universities do, but this one did, of having 2 semesters of a foreign language. And while I was in the community college still, I had known that fact. And so I was like, I want to take something unique. I want to take something fun. I don't want to just take like, Spanish that everybody takes or French that everybody takes, whatever. I want to take something fun. And so I ended up taking Italian 1 at community college. It was awesome, loved it. So I get to CU Denver, and I have to take a second semester of Italian, which means I have to go back to the community college for that class because they don't offer Italian at CU. And I'm like,
Oh,
well,
interesting.
I mean, it's fine because it's a tri-institutional campus. So CU Denver, Metro State, where I ended up eventually going to, and the community college are all on the same campus in the heart of downtown Denver. It's really cool that they have like this entire campus with 3 separate colleges and universities all on the same campus, which is pretty neat.
Yeah,
So
I
it
guess
wasn't
that's
like,
convenient too when you have to take a class at a quote different institution.
right. So it's like literally I just had to go to a different building on the same campus. So it wasn't like detrimental, but it was still, one of those things that I was like, well, I mean, I could do that and that's fine if that's what I have to do. But I was like, why not do my second semester of Italian in Italy? Why not do a study abroad? Actually go live it and breathe it and practice it in the moment. And so I started exploring those opportunities and ended up finding a great university that I was able to partner with to do a study abroad. And off I went in the summer, did a nice summer study abroad, and it was a wonderful experience. And then I get back August like 2nd, somewhere around there, and I'm getting ready for heading into my rising senior year. So it was going to be the first semester of my senior year. I have 2 semesters left. Again, I'm working at that amazing internship where I'm making tons of money, getting great experience. It's just an awesome opportunity. There's the maybe potential of getting on full time after I graduate, becoming an actual employee. So kind of everything is just kind of coming up Shawn at this point. Like things are going good, things are rocking and rolling. I have good momentum. And then I get back and I'm talking to my mom and my family down in Albuquerque, where I'm originally from, and we're kind of kicking tires on when I'm going to come back down there so I can visit and I can share my experience in Italy with my mom. My mom never went abroad, so it was going to be a really cool experience for her as well. And then August 13th, I was walking home from the gym and I get a call from my aunt, and my mom had passed away, and it just destroyed me. It was not out of the blue. My mom had been sick for, I mean, as long as I can remember, 10, 12 years with COPD. And this was really before COPD became as commonplace as it is now. Like now it's a course, or it's a disease state that we learn about in like our curriculum within dietetics and things like that.
Right. Can you
But
just say what COPD means for people who might be unfamiliar still?
yeah, it's I can't remember the C and the O, but essentially it's a breathing disorder, where pulmonary disease, where it's asthma on steroids times a billion, essentially, in a very simplified version.
Yeah.
You
Chronic obstructive
chronic obstructive. Thank you.
pulmonary disease.
Yeah.
I had to Google it. So,
it's very systematic and a commonplace with a lot of people that smoke, and you end up with chronically getting pneumonia. You get all the bad things that can happen in your lungs, and you end up taking there's a lot of really good treatments now that are less steroid driven, but during the era that we were in, back in the 90s and early 2000s, steroids were the primary driver of how to correct it. It was just steroid shots, inhalers with steroids, albuterol, this and blah blah blah, and that took a big toll on my mom, because for a number of years, even with her condition, she continued to smoke. Like it took a long time for her even to quit smoking,
right.
and it just put a lot of compounding pressure, and she just ended up succumbing essentially to congestive heart failure because of the constant influx and detriments to her body from a lot of the medications, poor eating habits, lack of getting around because of just inability to do so. Like she was wheelchair bound. It was just this complex web of all of this stuff. Like if it could go wrong with her, it went wrong with her. And, I knew that the day was gonna happen. I don't know. I just kind of felt that it was coming soon. Like I called her when I was in Italy. The last time I actually ever spoke with her was when I was in Italy over the summer, towards the end of the trip. So we were talking about plans of when I was going to come to visit. We had a fall break that was fairly early in the semester, so I was going to try and come down there for a long weekend. And that was the last time that I spoke with her, and I could kind of just hear in her voice that she was done fighting. I mean, she had been fighting for 10, 15 years, and I could just feel it was time, in her voice, that she was just kind of trying to not like overwhelm me because, here I am in a foreign country. I'm super excited about my trip and, all of this stuff, positive stuff.
Right.
And, I think she was kind of trying to be strong in the moment to like not really give me the inclination that she was done fighting, but I could just feel it in her voice. And I don't know, just maybe it was just like familial intuition that, this was my mom and I knew. But I kind of hung up the phone on that call and was like, I don't know if I'm gonna see her again. And sure enough, I didn't, and I actually never even got to speak to her again, that's what breaks my heart, is that I never got to like talk to her and talk to her about how she was doing. Excuse me. So there was a lot of guilt and frustration and anger and sadness, like all the emotions that you can carry when that happened. But it was also like shell shock. I came home from the gym and I lived with one of my really good friends at the time, but she was traveling for some stuff. And so there wasn't anybody home. It was just me and her cats. And I'm deathly allergic to cats. And so like 9 times out of 10, I would primarily just kind of be up in my room or down in the kitchen making food or whatever, to where I wasn't around like the cats specifically. But I was just kind of like in this like state of zombie shock, and I was in my room and I had shut the door but not like latched it, and one of her cats that like absolutely adored me, this cat loved me and I loved him, but like I was just allergic, so I couldn't like rub my face on him and give
You're
him
like,
like,
I love you, but you're gonna kill me.
yeah. But he popped the door open and he came in and he literally just sat on my feet. Like he knew that I was in a bad place, and he just sat there and kind of like rubbed on me and stuff. It was super sweet. And, I'm super grateful that I at least had a cat there to console me while I was in this like shocked, moment.
Right.
And, the next day I got up and, I didn't know what to do. So I just went to work. It was just, I just needed routine. So I went into work. And my boss was super awesome, super great guy. I texted him the night before and was like, hey, because he knew like I had to go home a couple of times for emergencies and stuff with my mom. And up to that point, so he knew like what was going on. And so I texted him and I was like, hey, my mom died, whatever. And he was like, oh, like don't come in tomorrow, take as long as you need, whatever. But I didn't know what else to do with myself, and I was home alone, and I was just like, I just need to be around people. So I went into work, and he was super, super awesome. He was just like, you can be here. I understand that you need to be around people. Totally fine. He's like, but I don't want you doing work today. I don't want you like stressing about that. Like, just be here, do your thing, do whatever you need to do, but don't, bother yourself with like stress and, projects and, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was kind of when the idea that, hey, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, because up to that point, like my entire higher education focus was security. It was, just doing what was safe and comfortable and was going to secure me a decent job and make me decent money and whatever. But at that point, like I grew up without a dad. I didn't even go into like my dad stuff. And when I was doing the questions for you, but I grew up without a dad in a single parent home, and my dad died when I was 19. I never met him. So like that was like my mom was my entire world, my entire life. And so, I was just kind of like, I don't want to just do this to do this. So I started kicking tires on, different, healthcare and, doctor and, like, it was just like something that I wanted to do something where I could help people not have to necessarily navigate the things that I did and my family did for the past 10 years. So I just, ended up kicking tires. And at the time I was like, oh, I don't want to go to med school because then I'll be in school for another 10 years. And here I am like 10 years later, a doctorate. So yeah, but
the irony.
yeah, I know exactly. But I ended up stumbling across the idea of becoming a nutrition student and dietetics. I had never heard the word dietitian before. I had no idea what that was, but I was just like, nutrition, like that can help people. And so I transferred, or I started the process to transfer back to Metro State, where I had gotten that big pile of F's waiting for me. And yeah, that's kind of like where I got to that point. I don't know if you want me to interject from there and go on with the story, or if you want to take a breather or
Yeah, this is actually a great time to take an intermission because my Zoom meeting is going to close us out again. So if you want to rejoin
awesome. Perfect.
my link, I'll just keep the meeting started. See you next.
Sounds good.
Editing Chelsea here. I hope you all enjoyed this first installment of my conversation with Shawn Portwood. I will be publishing these now multiple episodes in the coming weeks. So today is part 1. Stay tuned next week for part 2, and there will be a bonus episode, part 3, to finish out our conversation. So if you are interested in learning more about Shawn, I will put his Instagram links in the description box below, and you can ask him any questions that may have come up for you. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.